It is February 5th, 2022 today. I'm going to be doing an update for you on some fig cuttings that I started. Logistics, that first bin there, that's the one that I started January 1st, has the 3 groupings of Black Madeira. So we'll take a look at that, see the results, at least preliminary results of those different methods to see if we can draw any conclusions. And then we've got a couple more bins of figs that were actually started on January 6th. So these have been rooting for only 4 weeks at this point. Before launching into looking at the results and where the fig cuttings are at, just want to quickly talk about setup changes. So we can see that we definitely have lights overhead. I don't have these on racks because I still need the bottom heat on these guys at this point. They're all at different stages just because the cuttings all kind of varied in thickness and length. Each variety has its own timing. Some just take longer than others. So they're not ready to be withdrawn from bottom heat. Definitely have some front runners here that are taking off, leafing out at this point that I'll show you in a little bit, but also have some that haven't done a whole lot. So still want to keep them on that bottom heat for now. Because of that, and that my racks are narrow, it didn't make sense for me to switch to a racking system since I need these all kind of together at this point to utilize that matte surface area. Arena LED lights that I got off on Amazon, you can daisy chain them together. I bought a kit that has 8 in a set. Really nice and configurable because they include power cords so that you can have separate runs. You don't have to use them all in a linked fashion. But I basically have 4 lights strung together at the top. They're just connected together using the connectors that they provide. The lights themselves are 2-foot length and they're considered full spectrum. You can see that there are reflectors that they also include, and that just helps direct the light down on the plant. So instead of racking these, I went ahead and just found some 3/4 inch PVC and connectors in my garage. Always good to have some of that laying around. And you can see basically I made a quick little stand here out of that. I did not have to glue it together. So at the very middle I have a T running down. At the bottom is another T, and then really just inserted a couple of short lengths that fashions as a foot. And then off that T overhead, I've got a run, an elbow down, and the same kind of deal where I've got another T at the bottom with short little legs. And then I just used my Bowflex weights to kind of secure that so it doesn't fall over. So yeah, this is not a very elegant setup. For the short term, it's working out for me. So here we can see on this end as well. Just got that weight down there. The reason I've applied lighting at this point is because a lot of these figs are starting to swell their buds and some of them have already pushed growth. You can see leaves are starting to emerge, figs are starting to emerge on these. And they need the lighting to support their growth. Now, not all of them are showing signs. Some of them are a little bit behind, but I don't believe that the lighting is going to adversely affect them. These are in black grow pots, so it's not like the lighting is directly on the roots or anything like that. So far, I haven't seen any dieback on leaves, where they emerge and then they shrivel up. So that's one thing that I really like about this method is even though you do have to take a lot more care of these as far as the watering. The moisture level is lost very fast with having the bottom heat and the air exposure. But the gain you get is there has been no rot issues for me with these cuttings. And when they're growing, it's steady, strong growth. It's not a false start where they push leaves prematurely and then they drop. So this is maybe a slower method for propagating your cuttings, but I think it's also a more dependable method. Okay, another thing I want to mention before going into the results is the watering. At this stage, I am misting these at the top still, but the majority of the water is actually through bottom watering. So what I'm doing is filling my watering can up, and then I'm adding in this water-soluble fertilizer at 25% of the concentration that they tell you to use. So like for this product, they say use 2 teaspoons per gallon of water. So I'm only using half a teaspoon. And I'm doing that once a week when I bottom water. So I'm taking this, putting it into my watering can, then I just pull out one of these pots and simply throw the water into the bin. It disperses and the pots wick that up. And that's because most of the roots at this point are at the bottom, and that's where you want the moisture level. You don't necessarily need it up top. Just a quick mention on fungus gnats. I've heard some people concerned about that or have that issue themselves. If you do have that, I've heard some people using a product called Natural to control it. Basically put that product in the water, and then watering that media helps kill those gnats and their larvae. I personally have absolutely no issues with gnats using the media that I have going here. You know, coconut coir and perlite is completely inorganic and sterile, and there are no gnats at all in this room, where I've had these cuttings for 5 weeks now. So definitely a good solution. Again, it's possible just because of my climate. We don't have issues with those as much as maybe people in the eastern United States or western United States, where it's more humid. Again, being in the desert climate, you know, our humidity levels are very low, including my home. So that might also be a factor, but absolutely no issues so far with fungus gnats or any kind of insect. So just a quick few points about the sensor and the thermostat as well. I mentioned that a thermostat is a really important thing if you're going to be applying bottom heat, so that you have a consistent temperature for your cuttings and you're not cooking them. You know, some people questioned where I was putting this sensor. Some people want to put it at the first few inches of soil or media that their cuttings are in. What I would say is that's not a very good option if you have a deep pot like I've got here with these tree pots that are 9 inches long. So what will happen is if I set my thermostat for 78 degrees and I plunge this into the first 3 inches of soil like this, what I found will happen is it will overheat the bottom. So I actually tested this where I stuck it in the top and then got a reading from the bottom, and it was 98 degrees on the bottom. So at that point, you're cooking your roots, the media is going to completely dry out, and you're going to send your cutting into shock. So I definitely don't suggest putting the sensor at the top. That's not going to be accurate for where the roots are. Your roots are down at the bottom. So what I like to do is find the center point in your bin, because that's going to be the hottest spot, and drop that cord all the way to where it's sitting on the bottom. Down the line, we can definitely see a difference here. The third row has not really done much. I see none of the leaves actually emerging on that grouping yet. So that tells me that potentially scoring, or at least the combination of scoring and rooting gel, actually seems to have a detrimental effect, at least on the initial growth. The second group is slightly performing better than the first group. As you can see, the leaves are at a later stage. They're actually opening up. So if I pick this cutting up and we take a closer look here, you can see that it actually has the first start of the leaves opening up on this one. The first group is also doing quite well. I have a couple, at least, that have swollen the buds and the leaves are starting to emerge. So at least for right now, this experiment tells me that probably the no frills method is the best to take, because I'm really not seeing a huge difference between 1 and 2 groups. Now, one thing to note about these cuttings as well is I didn't cut them all at the same length. Some of them were longer, some were shorter. Cutting, for example, that's in group 1 has actually 4 nodes above the soil line. So it's got one here, 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 and here. That just requires more energy, you know, to push growth. So in hindsight, next time around I will be cutting these shorter. You know, there's no need to have such a huge cutting. It just is going to take a lot longer for this guy to root. Just got my Harvey cuttings. You can see I got a few new varieties that I want to try out here. The plan was to graft those 4 varieties onto my in-ground trees, but the cuttings were so thick that that wasn't really a viable option for me, so I ended up rooting them. So I only got 1 of each variety. See, I've got 8 cups there, and because, you know, each cutting is fairly long and has 4 to 5 nodes, it's really easy and a good idea to cut those in half so that you can root 2 instead of 1, just in case something fails. So each of these basically has 1 node above the soil line and 1 or 2 below. Excited to get this going. I figure I can, you know, keep these in containers, and then as the tree grows, I can harvest wood from that and then graft. So these cuttings were all started a week later than that first lot. These were started on January 6th. So we're pretty much at week 4 for these guys. I have a mix in here. I've got Socorro Black, Black Madeira, Nixon Peace, Borgia Gris, Red Lebanese Becca Valley, Smith, probably some others, Martinenca Ramada. So quite a few different varieties going here. I should mention that guy at the back, that is not one that I started January 6th. So just a closer look at this guy. This Borgia Gris I took from my in-ground tree at the very end of November or early part of December. So this guy was just simply put into a bag of coconut coir, and then I wrapped some paper towel around that plastic bag just to kind of diffuse the light in my kitchen. Stuck it on the top of my refrigerator and pretty much forgot about it. I did give it water maybe once during the 2 months that it was on my fridge. And at about 8 weeks, I started to see the buds start to swell. So at that point, I took it out of the plastic bag and up-potted it into the 4x9, added it to the rest of these cuttings. Does prove out, like I've always said, you don't need bottom heat in order to propagate your cuttings. You don't need a humidity bin. It can be as simple as sticking these things in a bag and putting them in a cupboard or something, or on the top of your fridge. You know, this took 3 months to get it to looking like that, whereas I think at 2 months, all of these cuttings will be looking like that guy, be at that same stage. So you shave a month off by setting them up this way with the bottom heat. Just taking a closer look at one of the cuttings that's in our second group. This one's been, you know, rooting for 4 weeks. This is a Martinenca Ramada. You can see we've got a couple things happening here. We've got a fruit emerging, a fig emerging, as well as the leaf node is starting to unfold there. Now on the fruit, I'm going to go ahead and leave it on there. A lot of people would remove it. That's the more conservative thing to do. I don't think it really harms anything, so I'm leaving fruit when I see it emerge. So that's about it for an update. Probably in 3 weeks or so, all of these should be leafed out. That's really the general rule of thumb for rooting cuttings in this method. you should see growth within 4 to 8 weeks with the air exposure and all. Now there are cuttings that might even take longer than that, but the vast majority, that's the time frame you should see. So hopefully I can come back in a few weeks here and show you all of the green, all the growth. Really from here on out, it's not going to be that much change. Probably watering may up on frequency because you've got more growth to support for the plant, so it's going to be a bit more thirsty. But I'm going to keep up the same fertilization regimen, once a week, just applying that bottom watering there. And then hopefully around March time frame, I can get these guys transitioned to outdoors. Hope you're enjoying the updates. If you have questions, let me know in the comments. I'll try to answer them as best I can. Thanks for watching and happy gardening.